His small hands clutched the expensive fabric with desperate strength. Rain dripped from his forest green cardigan onto polished Italian leather. His voice cracked, rising above the hushed business dealings. "They're hurting my mama." If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's go back to hours before, where it all started. The soundproof cellar beneath Il Drago went absolutely silent. Cigars paused inches from lips. Documents froze mid-signature. Every dangerous conversation evaporated into shocked stillness. But the man this terrified 6-year-old had grabbed wasn't just anyone. He was Natale Marino, the impeccably dressed shadow of the North End. A man whose intricate neck tattoo was the last thing rivals saw before they disappeared. A man who'd built his empire on ice-cold calculation and merciless control. And what he did next would shatter everything he'd become. Stay with me until the end, because this story will prove that even the darkest shadow can find redemption in the smallest light. It was a bone-chilling early winter evening in Boston's North End, the kind of December night where cold seeped through brick and mortar like an unwelcome ghost. Above ground, Illinois Drago operated as it always did, a legitimate Italian restaurant where tourists paid premium prices for handmade pasta and the North End's old families gathered for Sunday dinners. White tablecloths gleamed under warm amber lighting. The scent of garlic, basil, and slow-simmered tomato sauce filled the air. Waiters in crisp white shirts moved between tables with practiced grace, their smiles professional and their memories conveniently selective. But beneath the restaurant, access through a concealed door behind the wine cellar's most expensive vintage rack, existed an entirely different world. The underground sanctuary had been carved out during Prohibition, expanded in the 60s, and perfected in the decades since. Thick stone walls, reinforced with modern soundproofing, created a space where secrets died before they could escape. The air down here was different, cooler, carrying the faint scent of aged wood, expensive cigars, and the peculiar tension that always accompanied men discussing matters of life, death, and money. Soft Italian opera played from hidden speakers, Verdi's dark melodies providing just enough ambient noise to blur the edges of conversation without drowning out the important words. The cellar maintained a constant temperature that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with creating an environment where men could work without distraction, where deals could be struck and disputes could be resolved far from the prying eyes of law enforcement or rival operations. This was Natale Marino's kingdom, and he ruled it with the cold precision of a man who'd learned early that sentiment was a luxury the powerful couldn't afford. He sat at the head of the long mahogany table, positioned not in the protective shadows favored by cautious bosses, but in clear view where his dark, penetrating eyes could assess every face, every gesture, every flicker of hesitation or deceit. At 38, Natale had already carved out an empire that stretched across New England's most lucrative territories. His rise had been swift, brutal, and marked by a strategic brilliance that made older, more established families grudgingly step aside. His charcoal three-piece suit was tailored to perfection, the kind of precision tailoring that whispered wealth without shouting it. The fabric moved with him like a second skin, each line sharp enough to cut. His burgundy dress shirt, worn without a tie and with the top button deliberately undone, suggested a man comfortable enough in his power that he didn't need to armor himself in tradition. The silver watch on his left wrist was understated but undoubtedly expensive, catching the low light whenever he gestured to emphasize a point. But it was the tattoo that truly defined him. An intricate Baroque design coiled around his throat like a serpent of ink and shadow, its elaborate patterns seeming to shift and breathe when he turned his head. The dark swirls and sharp geometric lines created an optical illusion of movement, as if the design itself was alive, watching, waiting. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a permanent declaration that Natale Marino had marked himself as something other, something beyond the reach of ordinary men and their ordinary fears. His hair, dark and perfectly styled, framed a face that could have belonged to a film star if not for those eyes. They were obsidian mirrors that reflected nothing back, cold and calculating, windows into a soul that had locked away every soft emotion years ago. This was a man who'd eliminated his first serious rival at 23 with such cold efficiency that the story had become legend in certain circles. A man who'd built walls around his heart so thick that even he'd forgotten what warmth felt like. Tonight, like every Thursday for the past 5 years, he was conducting his weekly operational briefing with his inner circle. These weren't mere employees or muscle. These were the men he trusted with his empire, his life, and his secrets. Dario sat to his right, a slender man in his early 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of unremarkable face that made him perfect for his role. He was Natale's financial architect, the wizard who transformed dirty money into clean investments, who could read a balance sheet the way poets read verse. His ledgers held the real map of Natale's empire, traced in offshore accounts, shell corporations, and legitimate businesses that served as perfect fronts. Tonight he was walking through the week's movements with his usual meticulous precision, his pen tapping specific numbers that represented territory profits, laundering efficiency, and return on investments both legal and otherwise. Across from Dario sat Johnny, built like a bulldog and just as tenacious. His scarred knuckles and broken nose told the story of a man who'd worked his way up from street enforcer to territorial manager through sheer competence and unwavering loyalty. He handled collections, managed street-level operations, and dealt with competitors who needed discouragement. His reports were always thorough, always delivered in the same gravelly voice that never wasted words. He just finished updating Natale on this week's collections, noting 3 resolved disputes and 2 warning visits to operations that had tested boundaries. Standing by the reinforced steel door was Enzo, tall and silent as a watchful statue. He served as Natale's driver, bodyguard, and most trusted weapon. His eyes never stopped moving, constantly scanning for threats that shouldn't exist in this impenetrable sanctuary. He'd taken a bullet for Natale 3 years ago and wore the scar like a badge of honor. His loyalty was absolute, tested in blood, and sealed in the kind of trust that couldn't be bought or broken. The conversation flowed with the practiced efficiency of men who knew their roles perfectly. Every moving piece had its place. Every problem had a solution. Every potential threat was identified, assessed, and neutralized before it could grow into something dangerous. Control was absolute. Order was maintained. The machine ran smoothly because Natale had spent 15 years perfecting it, removing every source of chaos, every unpredictable variable, every soft emotion that might interfere with cold calculation. Natale had just lifted a crystal tumbler of aged whiskey to his lips, acknowledging a point in Dario's report with a slight nod, when reality itself seemed to fracture. The reinforced steel door, designed to withstand police battering rams and rival assaults, burst inward with explosive force. The heavy metal crashed against the stone wall with a sound like a gunshot, sending echoes through the cellar that made every man's hand instinctively move toward concealed weapons. Cold air and rain swept into the warm sanctuary, extinguishing the candles on the side table and sending papers fluttering across the mahogany surface. Enzo stumbled backward into the room, his face drained of all color, his hands reaching futilely to intercept the catastrophe that had somehow bypassed him. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His eyes, usually so calm and controlled, were wide with shock and something that looked almost like fear. In all the years he'd stood guard, nothing had ever gotten past him. Nothing. But something just had. A small blur of forest green and desperate determination shot past Enzo like a missile seeking its only target. Tiny brown leather shoes slapped against cold concrete, leaving wet footprints that gleamed in the low light like accusations. The sound of those small, rapid footfalls was obscenely loud in the shocked silence, each step a violation of everything this space represented. The impossible had happened. The sanctuary had been breached. The untouchable shadow of the North End had been reached by the one thing his walls couldn't stop. A child. Conversations died mid-word. Dario's pen froze on paper, a half-written number abandoned. Johnny's hand had already found his weapon, fingers wrapped around the grip beneath his jacket, but he didn't draw. Even the opera seemed to falter, as if the recording itself recognized blasphemy. Every dangerous man in that cellar understood they were witnessing something that should be impossible, something that violated every protocol and security measure that had been perfected over decades. The boy was tiny, maybe 6 years old, with light brown hair plastered to his head by winter rain. His forest green cardigan, lovingly knitted and carefully chosen for some better occasion, was soaked through and torn at one sleeve. The cream-colored t-shirt underneath clung to his shivering frame. Mud streaked his face where tears had carved rivers through the grime. His hazel eyes, impossibly wide with terror and hope and desperate faith, locked on Natale with the single-minded focus of someone who'd bet everything on one final, impossible prayer. The visual contrast was devastating, almost obscene in its wrongness. This small, innocent thing in his ruined cardigan and muddy shoes, surrounded by 6 men in $1,000 suits. Men whose hands had orchestrated murders and whose decisions destroyed lives with casual indifference. It was fundamentally wrong on every level. A lamb stumbling into a den of wolves. A child's story invading the cold reality of organized crime. But the boy didn't see wolves. He didn't see danger. He saw only salvation. He lunged forward with single-minded desperation, small legs pumping across the concrete floor. Enzo made a belated grab for him, but the boy was already past, driven by pure adrenaline and terror. He crashed into Natale's legs with enough force to make the boss's whiskey slosh dangerously in its crystal prison. Small hands clutched expensive charcoal wool with white-knuckled strength, fingers digging into the fabric as if holding onto life itself. His face pressed against tailored material that cost more than most families spent on rent, and his whole body shook with cold and terror and exhausted desperation. Rain continued to drip from his sodden cardigan onto Natale's polished Italian leather shoes, each drop a tiny percussion in the stunned silence. The boy's breathing came in ragged gasps, his small chest heaving against Natale's leg. For a moment, the only sounds in that underground sanctuary were the child's desperate breaths, the soft patter of rainwater hitting expensive leather, and Verdi's aria playing obliviously in the background. Then the boy tilted his head back, looked up into the face of Boston's most feared criminal with those impossibly wide hazel eyes, and his voice shattered the stillness like breaking glass. "You're the boss, aren't you?" The words came out between gasping sobs, each syllable breaking with desperation. "Please, they're hurting my mama. They're gonna kill her. You have to help me. Please." The plea hung in the air, raw and desperate and impossibly innocent. Rain dripped. The opera played, and every man in that cellar held their breath, waiting to see what the shadow of the North End would do next. Natale froze. It wasn't the kind of stillness that came from calculation or control. This was something else entirely, something his lieutenants had never witnessed in all their years of service. His entire body went rigid, as if an invisible hand had reached into his chest and squeezed. The crystal tumbler in his hand trembled, just barely, sending tiny ripples across the amber liquid. His dark eyes, usually so cold and impenetrable, locked onto the boy's tear-streaked face with an intensity that was almost painful to witness. The child continued to clutch his legs, small fingers digging deeper into the expensive fabric, leaving damp impressions in the charcoal wool. His hazel eyes, wide with terror and desperate hope, never wavered from Natale's face. He was shaking so violently that his teeth chattered between words. "Please," Mattia whispered again, his voice breaking into fragments. "You're the boss, aren't you? Everyone says you protect the North End. They'll kill her. They said if she doesn't pay, they'll kill her. Please, sir, please." The words struck Natale like physical blows, each one landing with devastating precision in places he'd thought were long dead. His jaw tightened until the muscles jumped beneath his skin. The tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse with each rapid beat of his heart. His breathing, always so controlled, hitched just once. And then it hit him. The memory came not as a gentle recollection, but as a violent assault, ripping through 15 years of carefully constructed walls with the force of a battering ram. One moment he was 38 years old, sitting in his underground sanctuary, surrounded by power and wealth and absolute control. The next moment he was 7, standing in a cramped apartment kitchen that reeked of cheap whiskey and fear. He could see it all with crystalline clarity. The flickering overhead light that cast harsh shadows across peeling wallpaper. The cracked linoleum floor, sticky beneath his small bare feet. His mother, Maria Marino, beautiful even with her lips split and her eye already swelling shut, pressing herself against the counter as his father advanced with fists still clenched and rage still burning in his bloodshot eyes. She'd seen little Natale standing frozen in the doorway. Her good eye had found his, and despite everything, despite the pain and the fear, she'd try to smile. Try to protect him even as she was being destroyed. "Go to your room, baby," she'd whispered through lips that were already swelling. "Don't look. Please, Natale, don't look." But he had looked. He'd watched everything, paralyzed by a helplessness so profound it felt like drowning. Too small to intervene. Too weak to protect her. Too powerless to do anything but stand there and watch the one person who'd ever loved him suffer. His father had noticed him then, had turned with a sneer that showed missing teeth. "What are you looking at, boy? You want some too?" Maria had thrown herself between them, taking another blow meant for her son. "Run, Natale, run." He'd run. He'd hidden in his tiny room with his hands pressed over his ears, try to block out the sounds of his mother's suffering. And he'd made a promise to himself in that darkness, whispered through tears and snot and choking rage. Never again. Never be that weak again. Never be that helpless again. Never let anyone close enough to hurt like that again. He'd kept that promise. When he was old enough, strong enough, he'd eliminated the threat. His father had disappeared one night, and no one had asked questions. By then, young Natale had already been making connections, learning the trade, discovering that power was the only currency that mattered. He'd built his empire on the ashes of that childhood trauma, transforming helplessness into control, weakness into strength, emotion into ice. He'd become the monster, so he'd never have to be the victim again. But his mother had died anyway. Years later, the accumulated damage too much for her body to bear. He'd held her hand in the hospital, as she'd looked at him with sad, knowing eyes. "You became so hard, my Natale," she'd whispered. "I understand why. But don't let that hardness kill the good boy I knew. Promise me." He hadn't promised. He'd just watched her slip away, and then he'd locked that grief in the same vault where he kept every other soft emotion. Until now. The flashback released him as violently as it had seized him, throwing him back into the present where a 6-year-old boy in a ruined green cardigan clutched his legs and begged for his mother's life. The same way Natale had once wanted to beg someone, anyone, for his own mother's salvation. The walls he'd built so carefully, so ruthlessly, for 30 years began to crack. Not gently, but with the sound of breaking ice, fissures spreading through everything he'd become. His hand tightened on the crystal tumbler until it was in danger of shattering. His breathing came faster, harder. Something hot and dangerous burned behind his eyes. Dario and Johnny exchanged confused, worried glances. Enzo took an involuntary step forward, his instinct to protect his boss from whatever invisible threat had caused this impossible reaction. They'd seen Natale face down rival bosses, federal investigators, and assassination attempts without so much as a flicker of emotion. But Child's plea had brought him to his knees. Natale looked down at Mattia, really looked at him, and saw himself reflected in those desperate hazel eyes. Saw every child who'd ever been powerless. Saw the chance he'd never gotten. Saw his mother's sad eyes, asking him not to let the hardness kill the good boy she'd known. When he spoke, his voice was still cold, still commanding. But underneath ran a current of barely controlled fury that made even his most trusted men instinctively lean back. "What's your name, boy?" "Ematia," the boy stammered, his voice still breaking with sobs. Mattia Padavisi. My mama is Sofia. Sofia Padavisi. Where, Mattia? Natale's voice had transformed. The cold detachment was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Razor-sharp, focus married to barely contained fury. Where is your mother? Hanover Street. The yellow building with the red door. Number 247. Apartment 3C. The words tumbled out in a desperate rush. Please, they're still there. They said they'd come back if she didn't have the money by tonight. Please, you have to hurry. The transformation in Natale was instantaneous and absolute. The moment of vulnerability, the crack in his armor, sealed itself over with something harder than before. This wasn't the cold calculation his men were used to. This was hot, surgical precision, a predator that had just identified its prey. He set his tumbler down with controlled force, the crystal making a sharp sound against mahogany that snapped everyone to attention. When he looked up, his eyes blazed with an intensity that made even Enzo straighten. Enzo, his voice cut through the cellar like a blade. 3 cars. Full crew. I want surveillance on that building in the next 4 minutes. Anyone exits that location, I want them followed. Anyone suspicious within a 2-block radius, I want them identified. Move. Now. Enzo was already in motion before the last word left Natale's mouth, his phone out, fingers flying across the screen as he barked orders into his radio. All units, code red. Converge on Hanover Street, number 247. Silent approach. Eyes only until the boss arrives. Natale's gaze snapped to Dario, who had already closed his ledger, his earlier confusion replaced with the sharp attention of a man who recognized a crisis deployment when he saw one. Call Ricciardi. Tell him we're bringing him a patient within the next 20 minutes. Female, probable assault injuries. Tell him to prep the private suite and ask no questions. If he hesitates, remind him what we pay him for. On it. Dario's phone was already at his ear, his voice dropping to urgent, clipped tones as he relayed the instructions. Then Natale turned to Johnny, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The enforcer met his boss's eyes and saw something there that made his blood run cold. This wasn't business. This was personal. Johnny, I want to know who the hell is running a loan shark operation on Hanover Street without my knowledge or permission. I want names, I want locations, and I want it in the next 30 minutes. Natale's voice was quiet now, which somehow made it more terrifying. Someone is operating in my territory, targeting civilians in my neighborhood, and I didn't know about it. That ends tonight. Find out who they are, who they work for, and where I can find them. Consider it done. Johnny was already pulling out his own phone, scrolling through contacts. His network of informants stretched across every corner of the North End. If someone was operating without authorization, he'd know within the hour. Natale looked down at Mattia, who still clutched his leg, but had gone quiet, watching the sudden explosion of organized activity with wide, hopeful eyes. For just a moment, Natale's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He reached down and gently but firmly detached the boy's hands from his suit, then crouched to bring himself to eye level. Listen to me, Mattia. His voice was firm but no longer cold. I'm going to get your mother. Do you understand? I'm going to bring her somewhere safe where doctors can help her. But I need you to be brave for a little while longer. Can you do that? The boy nodded frantically, tears still streaming, but hope blazing in his eyes like a flame that refused to die. Good. Natale stood, shrugging off his suit jacket and draping it around Mattia's shivering shoulders. The expensive garment swallowed the small boy, but it was warm and dry. Enzo, the boy comes with us. He stays in the car with armed protection until I give the all clear. The cellar had transformed from a quiet sanctuary of calculated business into a war room mobilizing for battle. Phones buzzed with incoming reports. Men moved with purpose. The machine that was Natale Marino's empire had shifted gears from idle to full operational speed in under 2 minutes. Natale reached for his shoulder holster, secured beneath his vest, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. His movements were smooth, automatic, the muscle memory of a man who'd been in countless situations exactly like this. but his jaw was set with a determination that went beyond professional obligation. This wasn't just another problem to solve. This was personal. This was a debt being paid across time, to a 7-year-old boy who'd once been helpless, and to a mother who'd died asking her son not to let hardness kill the good he'd once been. 3 minutes. Enzo called from the door, where several armed men had already assembled. Surveillance confirms suspicious activity at the location. 2 males, heavy build, dark clothing. They're still inside. Natale's eyes went dark as midnight. Then we end this. Now, the convoy tore through the north and like a pack of hunting wolves. 3 black luxury sedans, their engines purring with barely restrained power, navigated the narrow cobblestone streets with precision that came from years of knowing every alley, every shortcut, every escape route in the territory. Natale sat in the lead vehicle's back seat, Mattia pressed against his side beneath the oversized suit jacket, while Enzo drove with controlled aggression that had them covering blocks in seconds. The boy had gone quiet, his small body rigid with fear and exhaustion. Natale kept one hand on the child's shoulder, a gesture that was both reassurance and restraint. Through the tinted windows, the familiar landscape of his kingdom blurred past. Corner bakeries closing for the night, cafes where old men played cards, the narrow residential streets where generations of families had built their lives under his protection. Protection he'd apparently failed to provide. The thought burned like acid in his chest. 30 seconds, Enzo announced, his voice tight with controlled tension. Surveillance confirms the targets fled through the back exit 2 minutes ago. Building is clear, but we've got eyes on the apartment. Natale's jaw tightened. The men had run. Smart, but not smart enough. Tell surveillance to track them. I want to know where they go, who they talk to, and what holes they crawl into. No one moves on them until I give the word. The sedan screeched to a halt in front of 247 Hanover Street. The building was exactly as Mattia had described. A 3-story walk-up with faded yellow paint peeling from its brick facade and a red door that had seen better decades. It was the kind of building where working families scraped by, where single mothers tried to build lives from nothing, where people existed just one crisis away from catastrophe. The kind of place that should have been under his protection. Natale was out of the car before it fully stopped, his men forming a protective perimeter with the fluid efficiency of Special Forces operators. He turned to Enzo. Keep the boy in the car. Doors locked. Arm guard. No one approaches. Understood. Enzo had already pulled a second man to the vehicle, both positioning themselves to create a defensive barrier around Mattia. Natale took the building's front steps 3 at a time, his expensive shoes echoing on worn wood. The door to the building hung ajar, one hinge torn from the frame. His eyes cataloged every detail with cold precision. Fresh scratches on the lock, muddy boot prints on the tile floor, the broken mailbox hanging open like a wound. 3rd floor, apartment 3C. The door was worse than the building entrance. It hadn't just been opened, it had been violated. The door frame was splintered where someone had kicked it in with brutal force. The door itself hung at an angle, one hinge completely torn away. Natale stepped inside and immediately cataloged the violence written in the small apartment's destruction. A tiny living space that someone had tried to make warm despite poverty. Thrift store furniture arranged with care, a child's crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, a small bookshelf with worn paperbacks organized by color. And scattered throughout, the evidence of brutal assault. A kitchen chair lay on its side, one leg broken. Shattered ceramic littered the floor near the entrance. Shards of what had once been a decorative vase, now reduced to glittering fragments. A lamp had been knocked from its table. The bulb exploded across the worn carpet. Dark droplets marked a trail from the kitchen to the living room, each one a small accusation. Then he saw her. Sofia Padavisi lay crumpled against the far wall like a discarded doll, one arm twisted beneath her at an unnatural angle, the other thrown across her abdomen in an instinctive protective gesture. She was small, probably in her late 20s, with dark hair matted with blood from a vicious head wound that had split her scalp above her right temple. Her face was a canvas of brutality, swollen lips, a broken nose still bleeding, bruises already darkening across her cheekbone. Defensive wounds marked both arms, deep purple contusions where she tried to shield herself from the assault. She wasn't moving. Natale crossed to her in 3 strides, dropping to one knee beside her still form. His fingers found her throat, pressing against the pulse point with practiced care. For one terrible moment he felt nothing. Then, faint as a whisper, he detected the flutter of life still clinging desperately to her broken body. "She's alive," he called over his shoulder to the man at the door. "Barely. Where the hell is Ricciardi?" 5 minutes out, Dario's voice came from somewhere behind him. "Ambulance is staged 2 blocks away, unmarked, waiting for your signal." Natale's eyes swept the immediate area around Sophia's body, looking for anything the attackers might have left behind. His gaze snagged on something that gleamed dully near her outstretched hand. He reached for it carefully, lifting it into the light. A gold signet ring, heavy, expensive, with an ornate design etched into its face. The kind of ring a man wore to advertise wealth and status. The kind of ring someone wouldn't abandon unless they'd lost it in a struggle. He turned it slowly, noting the distinctive pattern. A coiled serpent surrounding an elaborate letter S. Custom work. Traceable. The man who'd worn this had just signed his own death warrant. Natale pocketed the ring and turned his attention back to Sophia. She needed warmth. Shock was as deadly as the injuries themselves. Without hesitation, he stripped off his vest and the burgundy dress shirt beneath it, leaving only his white undershirt. Working quickly, he wrapped the shirt around her head, wound to slow the bleeding, then draped his charcoal vest over her torso. It wasn't enough. She was trembling, her body temperature dropping. He pulled off his suit coat from where it still hung on his shoulders and laid it carefully across her, tucking it around her shaking form. The expensive fabric, tailored to perfection just hours ago, was now soaked with rain, tears, and blood. He didn't care. "Ricciardi better be here in 3 minutes, or I'm carrying her to the hospital myself," Natale said quietly, his hand resting gently on Sophia's shoulder. "Dario, get Mattia's drawings from the refrigerator. All of them. The boy will want them when his mother wakes up. Not if. When. Because failure wasn't an option. Not tonight. Not for this woman who'd sent her son to find salvation in a monster, believing somehow that the shadow of the North End still had enough humanity left to care. He'd prove her right, whatever it took." Dr. Ricciardi arrived exactly 4 minutes later, his medical team moving through the apartment with the quiet efficiency of professionals accustomed to asking no questions. The doctor himself was in his late 50s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, carrying a presence that commanded respect in operating rooms and crime scenes alike. He'd been on Natale's payroll for 8 years, treating injuries that couldn't be explained to emergency rooms and maintaining a level of discretion that was worth every dollar Natale paid him. He took one look at Sophia, and his expression tightened. "We need to move her now. That head wound needs imaging and possibly surgery. She's lost significant blood. Stabilize her here first," Natale ordered. "I don't want her dying in transport." Ricciardi's team surrounded Sophia with practiced precision, establishing in 4-line, immobilizing her neck, wrapping the head wound with proper bandages to replace Natale's makeshift compress. Within 3 minutes, they had her on a gurney, vital signs monitored, ready for transport to Ricciardi's private clinic across town. Natale intercepted Enzo at the apartment door. "Bring the boy up. Carefully. He needs to see his mother is alive before we move her." Mattia appeared moments later, still swimming in Natale's suit jacket, his hazel eyes enormous in his pale face. He took one look at the gurney and his mother's still form and let out a strangled sound that was half sob, half gasp. Natale crouched beside him, one hand on the boy's shoulder, keeping him from rushing forward and disrupting the medical team's work. "She's alive, Mattia. Do you understand? She's hurt, but she's alive, and these doctors are going to help her. Can I see her?" Natale looked at Ricciardi, who nodded once. 1 minute. Don't touch anything." He walked Mattia to the gurney, keeping himself between the boy and the worst of the visible injuries. Sophia's face was swollen and discolored, but her chest rose and fell with shallow, mechanical breaths assisted by the oxygen mask now covering her nose and mouth. "Mama," Mattia whispered, his voice breaking. Fresh tears carved new paths down his dirty cheeks. "She can't hear you right now," Natale said quietly. "But she fought for you. That's why she told you to run. That's why she sent you to find me. She's a fighter, your mother. Remember that." The paramedics began moving the gurney toward the door. Natale gently pulled Mattia back, letting them work. As they maneuvered Sophia through the doorway, the boy buried his face against Natale's side, small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Once the medical team had departed, Natale guided Mattia to the small sofa, carefully turning him away from the blood stains and debris. He needed information, and he needed it while the memory was still fresh in the child's mind. "Mattia, I need you to be very brave and tell me exactly what happened. Can you do that?" The boy nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "Two men came. Big men. They had heavy boots. I heard them from my room. They were yelling at Mama about money. What do they look like? One had a shaved head and a really big neck. The other one had black hair and a scar." Mattia traced a line across his own cheek. "Like this. They said Mama owed money for the cafe she wants to open." Natale's jaw tightened. "What else did they say?" "The bald one grabbed Mama and pushed her against the wall. She tried to fight. She hit him with the vase." Mattia's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "But then the other one hit her. Hard. In the head. She fell down, and they kept kicking her, and I wanted to help, but Mama screamed at me to run." "Did they say anything else?" "Anything at all." Mattia's face crumpled with remembered terror. The one with the scar leaned down and said, "He said, tell your Mama the Viper always collects. We'll be back tomorrow for the rest." Then Mama pushed me toward the door and told me to find you. She said you were the only one who could stop them. The Viper." Natale's eyes went cold as winter ice. He pulled the gold signet ring from his pocket, holding it up to the light. The coiled serpent design suddenly made perfect sense. His phone buzzed. Johnny's name flashed on the screen. "Talk to me," Natale answered. "Boss, I've got an ID on that ring." Johnny's gravelly voice carried satisfaction and barely suppressed rage. "It belongs to Marco Russo, low-level enforcer. But here's the interesting part. Russo works for Vito Santini." Natale's grip on the phone tightened until the case creaked. Vito the Viper. The same. Santini was one of the Calabrese family's best enforcers until about 8 months ago. Word is he had a disagreement with the old man about methods, specifically about targeting civilians. Calabrese has rules about that kind of thing. Santini didn't like rules, so he went independent. Worse, he formed his own operation. Calls it the cartel. Drugs, high-interest loans, protection rackets. He's been operating on the edges of your territory for the past 6 months, testing boundaries, preying on people who can't fight back. Single mothers, immigrants, small business owners trying to make honest livings. The kind of people who won't go to the cops because they're afraid of deportation or worse. Natale stood, his entire body coiled with lethal purpose. The Viper. The name fit. Vipers were ambush predators that struck at the vulnerable, injecting venom and watching their victims die slowly. Where is he? My sources say he's been using a warehouse near the docks. Commercial Street, the old Rossetti fish processing plant. Abandoned for years, but there's been activity there recently. Lights at night, vehicles coming and going. He's got maybe a dozen men with him. Natale looked down at Mattia, who watched him with those wide, trusting eyes. The boy believed he could fix this. Believed the shadow of the North End was powerful enough, ruthless enough to deliver justice. He was right. "Enzo," Natale called toward the door. "Get the boy somewhere safe, somewhere warm. Feed him. Let him clean up. Postcards." He turned back to the phone. "Johnny, round up everyone. I want 20 men, full weapons, ready to move in 30 minutes. We're going hunting. What about Santini?" The Viper is about to learn what happens when you strike at something the shadow protects. The warehouse office on the industrial edge of the North End was the kind of place where screams went unheard and questions got answered. Concrete walls No windows, a single metal door that locked from the outside. The air inside smelled of rust, old motor oil, and fear. A bare bulb swung from the ceiling, casting shadows that danced across cracked walls like restless ghosts. Two men sat bound to metal chairs in the center of the room, their hands secured behind them with zip ties that bit into flesh. Marco Russo, the bald enforcer with the thick neck, had a split lip from where Johnny's men had convinced him to stop resisting. Beside him sat Tony Benedetto, the one with the scar across his cheek, whose black eye was already swelling shut. Both men wore the kind of cheap suits that marked them as muscle rather than management, the uniform of men who did violence for money and asked no questions. They'd been picked up separately within 20 minutes of Sophia's transport, caught before they could disappear into whatever holes Santini had prepared for them. Neither had gone quietly. Both now wore the evidence of their resistance in fresh bruises and shallow cuts. Johnny stood against the far wall, arms crossed, his scarred knuckles still red from the capture. Two more of Natale's men flanked the door, weapons visible, expressions carved from stone. The message was clear. There would be no escape, no rescue, no mercy unless it was earned. The metal door scraped open. Every man in the room straightened instinctively. Natale Marino entered like winter personified. He'd changed clothes since the apartment, now wearing black dress pants and a black button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled to his elbows. The Baroque tattoo on his neck seemed even more pronounced against the dark fabric, its intricate patterns catching the harsh light. His face was utterly expressionless, his dark eyes flat and cold as river stones. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the two bound men. Instead, he walked to the single metal table positioned in front of them and carefully, deliberately, set down the gold signet ring. It landed with a small, metallic sound that echoed in the silent room like a judge's gavel. Russo's eyes fixed on the ring. His thick neck flushed red. "That's mine. You can't just." "Quiet." Natale's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a blade. Russo's mouth snapped shut. Natale pulled out a chair and sat, his movements unhurried, controlled. He steepled his fingers and regarded the two men with the detached interest of a scientist examining particularly unpleasant specimens. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The swinging bulb created moving patterns across his face, making his expression impossible to read. Then Enzo entered carrying something small wrapped in a plastic evidence bag. He placed it on the table beside the ring without a word, then retreated to stand beside Johnny. It was a child's shoe, brown leather, scuffed and muddy, size for a 6-year-old boy. One of Mattia's shoes, the mate to the pair he'd been wearing when he burst into the cellar. Natale said nothing. He simply picked up the small shoe and held it, turning it slowly in his hands. The contrast was obscene. His large, calloused hands that had orchestrated murders now cradling a child's muddy shoe with almost reverent care. Benedetto, the one with the scar, began to sweat. His eyes darted between the shoe and Natale's expressionless face, understanding dawning with the slow, horrible inevitability of a nightmare. "Do you know whose shoe this is?" Natale asked quietly, still not looking at them. Neither man answered. "This belongs to a 6-year-old boy named Mattia Padavisi." Natale set the shoe down carefully beside the ring. "He wore this shoe tonight when he ran through winter rain to find me, when he begged me to save his mother from the two men who were beating her to death in her own home." Now he looked up, and his eyes were twin wells of controlled fury. "That boy interrupted my business meeting, violated my sanctuary, risked his life running through streets he shouldn't know how to navigate at his age, all because his mother told him I was the only person powerful enough to stop you." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Both bound men had gone pale. She was right. Natale leaned forward slightly. "Now you're going to tell me everything I want to know. You're going to tell me about the cartel. You're going to tell me about Vito Santini. You're going to tell me about the loan, the terms, and where I can find your boss. And you're going to do it quickly, because my patience died the moment I saw Sofia Padavisi's blood on her apartment floor." "We don't know nothing," Russo tried, his voice cracking. "We just collect." Natale's hand moved faster than thought, slamming palm down on the metal table with enough force to make both men jump. The sound reverberated like a gunshot. "Let me be clear," Natale said softly, dangerously. "You have one chance to talk voluntarily. After that, Johnny asks the questions, and Johnny doesn't have my restraint. Look at him." Both men's eyes slid to Johnny, who smiled without warmth and cracked his knuckles with deliberate slowness. Benedetto broke first. Okay, Christ, I'll talk. Just keep him away from me." "Smart." Natale leaned back, his expression returning to neutral observation. "Start with the loan. How much did Sofia Padavisi borrow?" 5,000. She came to us 3 months ago, said she needed startup money for a cafe. A legitimate business, you know. She had plans, permits, everything. The interest was steep, but she agreed. "How steep?" 30%. Monthly. Natale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 30% monthly meant the debt would double in less than 3 months. It was predatory lending designed to create permanent debtors. She made 2 payments. Russo added quickly, eager now to cooperate. On time, both of them. But the 3rd payment, she was short. Said her son needed medicine. Santini doesn't accept excuses. So you beat a single mother nearly to death in front of her child. It wasn't a question. Neither man met his eyes. "Where's Santini now?" "The old Rossetti Depot. Commercial Street, near Pier 9. He uses it as his base. There's maybe 10, 12 guys there at any time. He's paranoid, always moving, but tonight he's there. We were supposed to report back after collecting from the Padavisi woman. What was the plan if she couldn't pay?" Benedetto swallowed hard. "Take the kid. Use him as leverage. Santini's done it before. Forces the parents to work off the debt, doing other things. Moving product, mostly." The room went absolutely silent. Even Johnny looked shocked. Natale stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he spoke, his voice was colder than death itself. "You were going to take that child." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a line that had been crossed, a judgment that had been passed. "Johnny," Natale didn't look away from the 2 terrified men. "These 2 stay here. Secured. Federal guarded. They're going to testify about everything they just told me when the time comes. If either of them dies, someone answers to me." "Understood." Natale picked up the small muddy shoe, handling it with the same careful reverence as before. He looked at it for a long moment, then at the 2 men who would have stolen its owner. "You should pray Sofia Padavisi survives," he said quietly. "Because if she doesn't, this room becomes your grave." He walked out without another word, the shoe still in his hand, leaving behind 2 men who finally understood they'd made the worst mistake of their lives. Outside, Enzo waited by the car. "Boss, get me to Commercial Street," Natale said, his voice carrying the weight of a coming storm. The Viper's time just ran out. The old Rossetti fish processing depot loomed against the night sky like a corpse of Boston's industrial past. Rusted corrugated metal walls bore the scars of decades of salt air and neglect. Broken windows gaped like missing teeth. The building sat on a forgotten stretch of Commercial Street where legitimate business had died years ago, leaving behind only shadows and the kind of enterprises that thrived in darkness. Perfect for a man like Vito Santini. Natale's convoy approached with lights extinguished, 3 black sedans gliding to silent stops in positions that created a perfect perimeter. 20 men emerged like wraiths, spreading out with military precision. Some took positions on the building's flanks. Others covered the rear exit and the waterside escape route. Within 90 seconds, the depot was completely surrounded, every exit blocked, every escape route sealed. This wasn't a raid. It was a closing coffin. Johnny materialized beside Natale's car, his radio crackling softly with position confirmations. "All units in place, boss." Infrared shows 11 heat signatures inside, main floor. Santini's confirmed among them. They're armed, but not expecting company. Natale adjusted the black leather gloves he'd donned during the drive, flexing his fingers once. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a jagged shard of ceramic, part of the decorative vase Sofia Padovisi had used to fight back against her attackers. He'd collected it from her apartment floor, a fragment of a mother's desperate resistance. "I'm going in alone," Natale said quietly. "Boss, that's not." "Alone." Natale's tone left no room for argument. "If shooting starts, you finish it. But this conversation happens face to face. The Viper needs to understand exactly who he crossed." He walked toward the depot's main entrance, his footsteps echoing on cracked pavement. The building's heavy steel door hung partially open, light and voices spilling out into the December cold. He could hear laughter inside, the casual conversation of men who believed they were untouchable in their stronghold. They were about to learn otherwise. Natale pushed the door fully open and stepped inside. The interior was exactly what he'd expected. A gutted industrial space with concrete floors stained by decades of fish blood and machinery oil. Makeshift offices had been constructed from plywood and shipping pallets. A card table held stacks of cash, ledgers, and plastic bags filled with pills and powder. Metal shelving units lined one wall, stocked with the inventory of a criminal enterprise. More drugs, boxes of stolen merchandise, weapons. And in the center of it all, 11 men turned to stare at the intruder who'd just violated their sanctuary. Vito Santini rose from behind the card table. He was exactly what Natale had expected. Mid-40s, thick through the shoulders and chest, with the kind of build that came from years of enforcer work. His face bore the marks of a violent life. A crooked nose broken multiple times, scar tissue around both eyes, a mouth that seemed permanently set in a sneer. He wore an expensive leather jacket that couldn't quite disguise the prison yard swagger in his movements. "Who the fuck are you?" Santini demanded, his hand moving toward the weapon holstered at his hip. Natale stopped 10 feet from the table, standing in a pool of harsh fluorescent light that made the tattoo on his neck seem to writhe and pulse. He said nothing, simply stared at Santini with eyes as cold and dark as winter midnight. Recognition dawned slowly on Santini's face. The color drained from his cheeks. His hand froze halfway to his weapon. "Marino," he breathed. "Vito Santini." Natale's voice was quiet, conversational, which somehow made it more menacing than any shout. "The Viper. I've heard about you. Former Calabrese enforcer. Disagreed with the old man about methods. Decided to go independent. Built yourself a little empire preying on people who can't fight back." Santini's men had spread out, forming a loose semicircle, hands on weapons but not yet drawing. The smart ones looked nervous. The stupid ones looked eager. All of them were about to learn they'd bet on the wrong horse. Natale held up his gloved hand. Between thumb and forefinger, he held the ceramic shard, turning it slowly so the light caught its sharp, broken edges. "Do you know what this is?" Santini said nothing, but his jaw tightened. "This is a piece of a vase that belonged to Sofia Padovisi, a single mother who came to you for a legitimate business loan. A woman who was trying to build something good, something clean, a small cafe where she could provide for her son." Natale's fingers tightened on the shard, his gloved hand trembling slightly with suppressed rage. "She used this vase to defend herself when your animals broke into her home and beat her nearly to death in front of her 6-year-old child." The ceramic shard cracked slightly in his grip. The sound was sharp in the tense silence. "That child ran through winter rain to find me. He violated my sanctuary, grabbed my leg, and begged me to save his mother. Do you understand what that means, Vito? Look, Marino, if I'd known she was connected to you." "She wasn't connected to me." Natale's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "She was a civilian, a mother, a woman trying to survive in my territory, which means she was under my protection whether she knew it or not. And you, Vito Santini, violated the oldest rule we have." He took a step forward. Santini's men tensed, but their boss raised a hand, stopping them. "You attacked a woman, a mother protecting her child. You plan to take that child as leverage. That is not business, Vito. That is not the old ways. That is a violation of every ground rule that separates us from animals." Natale crushed the ceramic shard completely in his gloved fist. Fragments fell to the concrete floor like broken promises. Here is my judgment. Every penny of the cartel's assets, he gestured at the money on the table, the inventory on the shelves, is seized as of this moment. It will be liquidated and used for full financial restitution to Sofia Padavisi and every other victim of your predatory operation. Every loan you've made is now void. Every debt is erased. You can't. I just did. Natale's eyes blazed. Second, you and every man who works for you has 3 hours to leave Boston. Not just the North End. Not just the city. I want you off the entire eastern seaboard. You go south, you go west, I don't care where, but if I find you anywhere from Maine to Maryland after 3 hours, you die. All of you. 3 hours? That's impossible. Then you'd better start driving. Natale pulled out his phone, checking the time with deliberate slowness. It's currently 10:47 p.m. At 1:47 a.m., every man in this building becomes a target. My people will be watching every highway, every train station, every bus terminal. The clock is ticking, Vito. Santini's face had gone purple with rage and humiliation. You're making a mistake, Marino. I got connections. The Calabrese family won't lift a finger to help you. I already spoke to the old man. He's the one who confirmed you were operating without sanction, targeting civilians, violating protocols. He gave me his blessing to clean up this mess. It was a lie, but a believable one. You're alone, Vito. You've always been alone. That's what happens when you build an empire on fear instead of respect. Natale turned to leave, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. One more thing. If Sofia Padavisi dies from her injuries, the 3-hour grace period becomes 3 minutes, and I will hunt every single one of you to the ends of the earth. He walked out the way he came, unhurried, his back exposed to 11 armed men. It was the ultimate display of dominance, showing them he feared nothing they could do, that their weapons and numbers meant nothing against the weight of his reputation and power. Behind him, he heard frantic movement, shouted orders, the scramble of men who'd just realized their world had ended. Outside, Johnny waited with a dozen men, weapons drawn. Boss, let them run, Natale said quietly, but track every single one. If they're still on the eastern seaboard after 3 hours, you know what to do. And the assets, inventory, everything. Liquidate it all. I want Sofia Padavisi to wake up in a hospital bed knowing she'll never have to worry about money again. And find every other victim of their operation. Every debt gets paid. Every loan gets erased. Natale pulled off his gloves, dropping them in a nearby trash bin along with the crushed ceramic fragments. The night air was cold against his skin, cleansing. The viper is defanged, he said. Now let's go check on the boy. Natale stood in the shadows across from the depot, a silent sentinel watching justice unfold with cold satisfaction. Within minutes of his departure, Vito Santini's carefully constructed empire began its chaotic collapse. Men emerged from the building like rats fleeing a sinking ship, carrying hastily packed bags, their faces tight with panic and humiliation. Car engines roared to life. Tires squealed against pavement. The Viper's crew scattered into the December night. Each man suddenly alone, suddenly vulnerable, suddenly understanding that power built on fear evaporated the moment someone more fearsome appeared. Santini himself was the last to leave, climbing into a black SUV with darkened windows. Even from a distance, Natale could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the defeated slump that came from a man whose reputation had been destroyed in a single conversation. The Viper had been neutered, his fangs pulled, his territory claimed, his legend reduced to a cautionary tale that would be whispered in the North End for years to come. The SUV pulled away, heading west toward the highway, toward exile, toward obscurity. Natale checked his watch. 11:03 p.m. 2 hours and 44 minutes remained on the deadline, but he knew Vito Santini wouldn't test his mercy. The smart ones never did. Boss, Johnny approached with a tablet, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. Surveillance confirms all 11 targets are mobile and heading out of state. 3 cars west on I-90, 2 south on I-95. We got eyes on all of them. Keep tracking for 72 hours. If any of them so much as think about coming back, I want to know before they cross state lines. Understood. What about the depot? Strip it. Everything. Cash, inventory, equipment, records. I want accountants going through every ledger, identifying every victim of their operation. Every person who took a loan, every business they extorted, every family they threatened. Full restitution to all of them. Johnny nodded, already typing notes. The cash alone is probably $200,000. The drugs and stolen merchandise, maybe another $300 if we move it through the right channels. I don't want the drugs moved. Destroy them. All of it. Natale's voice was firm. This isn't about profit. It's about sending a message. The cartel was a cancer. We're excising it completely. That's a lot of money to burn, boss. The principal is worth more. Natale turned away from the depot, walking toward his waiting sedan. Besides, the legitimate assets will more than cover what Sofia Padavisi needs. Find out what her cafe plans were. Space, equipment, permits. Whatever she needs to make it real, it gets paid for. Set up a trust fund for the boy's education. And make sure she has enough for medical bills, living expenses, whatever it takes for her to rebuild without ever having to worry about money again. You're setting her up for life. She ran to me for help. That means something. Natale slid into the back seat of the sedan, the leather cool against his skin. It means she believed the shadow of the North End still protected people. I intend to prove her right. Enzo started the engine, pulling away from the docks. The city slid past the windows, familiar streets and neighborhoods that Natale had spent 15 years controlling with ruthless efficiency. But tonight, something felt different. The weight of power sat differently on his shoulders. The tattoo on his neck, that permanent mark of who he'd become, no longer felt like just a symbol of fear and dominance. It felt like a promise, a covenant, a reminder that power without purpose was just cruelty wearing expensive suit. They drove in silence through the North End's narrow streets, past Il Drago, where his evening had started with ledgers and cold business calculations. Past the apartment on Hanover Street, where Sofia Padavisi had fought for her life and her son. Past the bakeries and cafes and family businesses that operated under his protection, most of them never knowing his name, but all of them benefiting from the order he maintained. His empire, his kingdom, his responsibility. The car turned toward Ricciardi's private clinic on the outskirts of the city. Matteo would be there by now, cleaned up and fed, probably sitting vigil outside his mother's room with the stubborn determination of a child who'd already proven himself braver than most grown men. Natale caught his reflection in the sedan's window. The Baroque tattoo on his neck caught the passing streetlights, seeming to shift and move with each pulse of illumination. For 15 years, that mark had represented his transformation from victim to predator, from the helpless boy who couldn't save his mother to the ruthless man who controlled an empire. But tonight it meant something else. Tonight, it was the mark of a protector, a guardian, a man who'd rediscovered that power could be used for something other than accumulation and control. His mother's voice whispered through his memory. Don't let that hardness kill the good boy I knew. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe that boy had just been buried deep, waiting for a 6-year-old in a green cardigan to dig him out. Over the following days, the machinery of Natale's organization worked with quiet efficiency. The cartel's assets were cataloged, assessed, and liquidated with the precision of a surgical strike. Every ledger was examined. Every victim was identified. Checks were cut and delivered anonymously to families who'd been trapped in predatory loan cycles. Debts were erased. Threats were neutralized. Sofia Padavisi's share was the largest. The original $5,000 loan was repaid in full. Her medical bills, extensive given the severity of her injuries, were covered completely. An additional $50,000 was deposited into a trust account for her cafe, enough to lease space, purchase equipment, and operate for the first crucial year without financial pressure. Another $50,000 went into an education trust for Mattia, locked until he turned 18, but guaranteed to cover university and beyond. The total came to just over $110,000. Money that would transform Sofia's life from desperate survival to genuine opportunity. Money that represented not just restitution, but a chance to build the future she'd been fighting for when Vito Santini's men had nearly destroyed her. Natale oversaw every transaction personally, signing off on each check, reviewing each allocation. It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about the promise he'd made to a terrified boy clutching his leg in a soundproof cellar. It was about proving that the shadow of the North End wasn't just a predator in expensive suits, but something more complex, something that could choose to use its teeth to protect rather than destroy. By the time the week ended, the cartel was a memory. Vito Santini was a ghost, last spotted somewhere in Nevada. His reputation shattered, his crew scattered, his empire reduced to cautionary whispers. And Natale Marino sat in his office above Il Drago, reviewing the final financial reports with the same meticulous attention he gave to every aspect of his operation. The books balanced. The victims were compensated. The threat was eliminated. Justice, cold and precise, had been served. He closed the ledger and looked out over the North End, his territory spreading before him like a kingdom of brick and stone. Somewhere out there, Sofia Padavisi was recovering in a hospital bed. Matteo was probably doing homework, drawing pictures, being a normal 6-year-old boy whose world hadn't completely collapsed. And Natale Marino, the shadow of the North End, had rediscovered that even monsters could choose to be something else when the right child asked them to be brave. The tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse once in the reflection of the office window, a permanent reminder of the protector he'd become. 9 months had transformed the North End in subtle but undeniable ways. Summer had arrived with its characteristic Boston humidity, turning the narrow streets into corridors of heat that shimmered above cobblestones. Tourists filled the sidewalk cafes. Children played in parks that had been reclaimed and renovated. The neighborhood felt different somehow, safer, as if an invisible weight had been lifted when the cartel disappeared. On a quiet corner of Salem Street, where morning sun painted brick facades gold and the scent of fresh espresso mingled with baking bread, stood a small cafe that hadn't existed 9 months ago. The sign above the door, hand-painted in cheerful red and yellow letters, read, "Mattia's Treats." Through the cafe's wide front windows, customers could see shelves lined with fresh pastries, a gleaming espresso machine manned by a woman with gentle eyes and a brilliant smile, and scattered throughout, children's drawings taped to every available wall surface. It was the kind of place that felt like home the moment you walked through the door. Natale Marino's black sedan pulled to a stop outside at precisely 3 p.m., the same time he arrived every Thursday. He'd changed his appearance subtly over the past months. Today he wore dark jeans instead of tailored slacks, paired with a charcoal blazer over a simple black shirt. No tie. The outfit was still expensive, still impeccably fitted, but somehow less intimidating. More human. The Baroque tattoo on his neck remained visible, but it no longer seemed to carry quite the same menace. He stepped out of the car, and before he'd taken 3 steps toward the cafe door, it burst open. "Zio Natale!" Mattia exploded onto the sidewalk, his face split by a grin that could have powered the entire North End. He was bigger now, his green cardigan long since replaced by a red t-shirt with a cartoon dinosaur on it. His light brown hair was longer, sun-streaked from playing outside. The haunted terror that had filled his hazel eyes 9 months ago had been replaced by the uncomplicated joy of a 7-year-old whose world was safe and secure. He crashed into Natale's legs with the same enthusiastic momentum he'd used that December night, but this time there were no tears, no desperation, no fear. Just pure, unfiltered happiness. Natale crouched down, accepting the hug with a gentleness that would have shocked anyone who'd seen him conduct business. His large hands, which had orchestrated violence and commanded empires, carefully steadied the boy's shoulders. "Ciao, Mattia. How was school?" "Good. We're learning multiplication, but I don't get it yet." "Will you help me? Mama said you're really good with numbers." "I might know a thing or two about numbers." The corner of Natale's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Let's see what you're working on." Inside, the cafe was busy with the afternoon crowd. Sofia Padavisi moved behind the counter with practiced efficiency, her dark hair pulled back in a neat braid, wearing a simple apron over a yellow sundress. The brutal injuries from that December night had healed, leaving only the faintest scar above her right temple, usually hidden by her hair. But the real transformation was in her eyes. Where there had once been desperation and fear, now there was confidence, pride, and a deep well of gratitude that she tried never to voice too directly, knowing Natalie disliked excessive thanks. She looked up as they entered, her face brightening. "Natalie, right on time as always. Your usual. Please, Sophia, and whatever Mattia wants." "Hot chocolate," Mattia announced, already tugging Natalie toward his favorite table near the window, the one with the best light for homework. Sophia prepared the drinks while Natalie settled into the chair across from Mattia, who was already pulling a rumpled worksheet from his backpack. The problems were simple multiplication, the kind that looked impossible to 7-year-olds but became second nature with patience and practice. "Okay, show me where you're stuck." "This one," Mattia pointed to a problem. 7 times 4. "I don't understand what it means." Natalie pulled a napkin from the dispenser and produced a pen from his blazer pocket. 7 times 4 means you have 7 groups of 4 things. So let's draw it out. If you have 4 candies, and I give you 4 more candies, and then 4 more, and keep doing that 7 times total, how many candies do you have? He began drawing small circles on the napkin, organizing them into neat groups of 4. Mattia watched intently, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration the way children do when they're thinking hard. "So we count them all?" "Exactly. Count them all." They worked through the problem together, Natalie's patience infinite, his explanations clear and simple. Around them, the cafe hummed with life. A young couple shared a pastry. An elderly woman read a newspaper over espresso. A group of teenagers laughed over sodas and cookies. Normal life, safe life, the kind of life that thrived when monsters protected instead of preyed. Sophia brought their drinks, setting them down gently. Hot chocolate for Mattia, thick and topped with whipped cream. A simple espresso for Natalie, prepared exactly the way he preferred it. "Thank you, Sophia." "Always." She hesitated, then reached into her apron pocket. "Mattia has something for you. He's been working on it all week." The boy's face lit up. "Oh yeah, wait here, Zio Natalie." He scrambled out of his chair and disappeared into the back room, returning moments later clutching something wrapped in newspaper. His hands trembled slightly with excitement as he presented it. "I made this for you. Mama helped me with the frame." Natalie carefully unwrapped the package, peeling back the newspaper to reveal a simple wooden frame, the kind sold at craft stores for a few dollars. Inside was a child's drawing, created with crayons and fierce concentration. 3 figures held hands in the center of the page. A woman with long dark hair in a yellow dress, a small boy with brown hair and a red shirt, and a tall man with dark hair and something colorful on his neck that might have been an attempt at the Baroque tattoo. Above them, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, were the words, "My family." Below each figure, labels, "Mama," "Me," and Zonatelle. The world seemed to stop. The cafe noise faded to nothing. Natalie stared at the drawing, at the 3 stick figures holding hands, at the word family, written in crayon by a child who'd chosen to include him in the most sacred circle of all. His throat tightened. His eyes, usually so cold and controlled, stung with something he hadn't felt in decades. The tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse once, a reminder of the journey from monster to man, from predator to protector, from the boy who couldn't save his mother to the man who'd saved someone else's. "Mattia, this is..." His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. He cleared his throat, tried again. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. Do you really like it?" The boy's face was anxious, hopeful. "I love it. This is..." Natalie looked up at Sophia, who was wiping her eyes with her apron, then back at Mattia. "This is my most prized possession. I'm going to put it in my office where I can see it every day." Mattia threw his arms around Natalie's neck, squeezing tight. "I love you, Zio Natalie." The words hit like a physical blow. Natalie's arms came up automatically, returning the embrace with careful gentleness, his large hands cradling the small boy who'd changed everything with 5 desperate words 9 months ago. "I love you too, kid." Sophia turned away, overcome, pretending to busy herself with wiping down the already clean counter. Around them, the cafe continued its gentle rhythm, unaware they were witnessing the final transformation of the shadow of the North End. Natale Marino, who'd built an empire on fear and control, who'd locked away every soft emotion to become powerful enough that no one could hurt him again, held a 7-year-old boy and accepted a crayon drawing as if it were more valuable than all the money in his accounts, all the territory under his control, all the power he'd accumulated. Because it was, the man who'd sought power through fear had finally found something worth protecting, had found purpose beyond profit, had found family in the most unexpected place, had found redemption in a small boy's desperate faith that even shadows could choose to be light. Outside, the North End continued its eternal dance of life. Inside Mattia's Treats, 3 people sat together at a table near the window, working on multiplication homework, drinking hot chocolate and espresso, and existing in the kind of peaceful moment that proved even the darkest stories could have endings written in hope instead of blood. The drawing sat on the table between them, 3 stick figures holding hands, a child's declaration that family was chosen as often as it was born. And the shadow smiled.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.